A wild horse was found tied and left to die in a blizzard. But what one farmer did next changed everything he thought he'd lost. The storm had already buried half the valley when Jack Murdoch saw it. Something dark struggling in the snow. A horse, bound and bleeding, its eyes filled with the kind of fear that mirrors your own. That night, saving it would mean more than mercy. It would mean saving himself. The wind howled across the high plains of Wyoming like an animal in pain. Snow swirled so thick it erased the horizon, turning the whole world into a moving wall of white. Jack Murdoch hunched over the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, eyes narrowed behind fogged glass, the heater long since given up against the cold. He'd spent the day delivering coal to ranches farther north, and by now even his bones ached from the cold. Nights like this always made him remember his wife, how she used to hum while brushing down her mare, the same melody that had followed him into every silence since she'd died 5 years ago. As the truck rounded a bend, the headlights caught something strange, a dark shape, half buried in snow. At first, Jack thought it was debris blown from the ridge. But then it moved. He slowed, leaning forward. The beam of his headlights cut across the storm and found a horse, its legs stretched out, body bound with frayed rope, sides rising in shallow, desperate breaths. For a moment, Jack froze. The sight didn't make sense. No one left an animal out here in weather like this. He slammed the truck into park, grabbed the old knife he kept under the seat, and pushed into the storm. The wind tore at his coat, slicing through his gloves, but he didn't stop. The horse's body trembled violently, the ropes biting into flesh rubbed raw. Its mane, dark and matted, was stiff with ice and blood. Jack knelt beside it, snow crunching under his knees. "Easy now," he murmured, voice almost lost to the wind. "You're not dying out here. Not tonight." He sawed through the ropes, one by one. Each cut released another small gasp of pain. The animal didn't fight. It just watched him, eyes wide and dark, full of a wild fear that reached straight through the storm and into him. By the time he freed the last rope, his fingers had gone numb. The horse tried to rise but fell again, collapsing against the snow. Jack caught its neck, feeling the pulse flutter weakly beneath his hands. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Stay with me." He looked toward the truck, 30 feet away, uphill, impossible through the drifted snow. Still, he bent his shoulder, hooking his arms around the horse's chest, and began to drag. The weight tore at his back, the wind roaring like an ocean, but he kept moving. Every few feet, he stopped to catch his breath, murmuring words he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. "You're all right. Just a little farther." When he finally reached the truck, he hauled the tailgate down and, with a strength he didn't know he still had, levered the animal inside. The bed creaked under the weight. Jack threw his coat over the horse's trembling body, slammed the tailgate shut, and climbed behind the wheel. His breath came ragged, his face burning from frostbite. For a long moment, he sat there, staring through the windshield, the wipers scraping across a blur of snow. Then, he started the engine. The headlights cut a path through the whiteout, illuminating the trail back toward his ranch. Behind him, in the truck bed, he heard the faint sound of breathing, uneven, but there, still alive. Jack drove slow, careful over the icy road. The storm swallowed the world, and in that cocoon of snow and engine noise, old memories stirred. He saw his wife again. The last time she'd ridden out, her laughter echoing through the valley. He'd told her the weather looked rough, that the hills weren't safe. She'd smiled and said, "You worry too much, Jack. Some things were meant to run free." When they found her horse days later, broken on the rocks, Jack had stopped going near the stables. He'd sold off most of his herd. Only the silence stayed. Now, as the truck rattled down the last stretch of road, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Eyes hollow, jaw tight, and then the faint rise of movement behind him. The horse shifted under the blanket, a low, weak snort cutting through the wind. "Hang on," Jack muttered, pressing the gas. "We're almost home." The snow deepened around his tires. He could barely see the turnoff to his property, the wooden sign half buried under drifts. But he knew the road by memory, by instinct. When he reached the barn, he left the engine running and ran to open the doors. The hinges screamed. Then he returned, heaving the blanket-wrapped horse onto the frozen ground. It hit the dirt with a grunt, eyes rolling white for a moment before going still. Jack knelt beside it, chest heaving, and laid a hand on its flank. The hide was cold, but still shivered under his touch. Alive. Barely. The sound of the front door opening made him look up. His daughter, Lily, stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale in the storm light. "Dad," she called. "What is that?" Jack turned back to the horse. Snow swirled between them, settling on his shoulders. "It's trouble," he said softly, "and I couldn't leave it there." The wind shrieked outside, slamming the barn doors against their hinges. Jack met his daughter's eyes across the dark, and for the first time in a long while, something flickered behind his tired expression. A small, stubborn spark. "Get the lantern," he said. "We've got work to do." The storm howled on, relentless, but inside that dim barn, a fragile circle of light formed. In it, a man who'd stopped believing in miracles began to fight for one. Lily set the lantern on a nail by the stall, its amber circle trembling as if the light itself were cold. Jack eased, the blanket back from the horse's ribs. Up close, the animal smelled of wet hide and metal, iron from the blood, rust from the ropes. Its breath came in thin threads, a soft fog that bloomed and vanished on the chilled air. Lily knelt, without a word. She had her mother's hands. Steady, careful, already reaching for the old tin pail and a square of clean cloth. "Hold the light," Jack said. She did, angling the lantern so the glow skimmed the horse's flank. The skin there was raw, the hair rubbed away in harsh bands where the rope had bitten deep. Jack dipped the cloth in warm water and pressed it to the wound. The horse flinched, not with violence, but with a startled twitch that ran the length of its spine. "Easy," he murmured, finding the low register that soothed colts and injured strays when he was younger, before grief dried his voice out like summer grass. They worked in pieces. Lily warmed more water on the pot-bellied stove at the back of the barn, the one Jack kept for winter calving but hadn't lit much these last years. The stovepipe pinged as it woke, smell of old smoke folding into the hay. Snow rattled against the roof, then softened into hush. Jack trimmed the matted hair around the worst gashes with a pocket knife, honed so thin it looked like moonlight. He moved slow, listening, counting breaths, mapping the space between each. 4 heartbeats. Pause. 3. Pause. "Dad," Lily whispered. "Look." On the horse's neck, just beneath the mane, the skin quivered. An ugly welt like a crescent burned into leather. Jack touched it with 2 fingers. The flesh was puckered and hard, a brand of pain more than ownership, but the shape was a letter, sure as ink, a crooked C, the edges shiny where the heat had sealed them long ago. Jack felt something shift behind his ribs, a quiet click, like a lock sliding home. He didn't say the rancher's name aloud. Names invited echoes. They cleaned until the pale water turned a dilute pink. Once, the horse's eye found Lily's face. She held that gaze, her mouth parted, as if listening to a story only the animal could tell. "Stay," she breathed. "You're safe." A small sentence, but it felt like a plank thrown into water. The horse didn't move. Jack fetched a bale of sweeter hay from the loft, the kind he'd saved without really knowing why, and fluffed it into the manger. He drizzled molasses over it, a trick an old farrier taught him for shocky horses. The animal sniffed, unsure. Then, with the hesitant courage of a survivor, it tore off a mouthful. The sound of chewing, soft and steady, loosened something in the air. Lily covered her smile with her sleeve, the way she used to when she was 8. "That's it," Jack said, surprise feathering his voice. "Good." He slid the blanket higher over the horse's shoulders, then stood to work the frozen latch on the side window. It stuck, then gave with a pop. Cold slipped in cleaner. Less bitter the storms. Scream dulled to a long, tired exhale. They spoke little else. Words, tonight, felt like boots in a church aisle. When Lily grew pale with fatigue, Jack sent her inside for tea. Alone, he studied the horse the way a smith studies steel. Reading lines and heat, the truth of stress carried deep. He saw the wanted weight of muscle beneath the grime, the breadth of chest, the angles of hip and hock that said speed and stubbornness in equal measure. A wild one, taken wrong. He could almost hear his late wife's voice. Some things were meant to run free. He checked the hooves, ice wedged in the frogs, edges rimmed with blood. He eased each foot up, chipping carefully with an old pick, talking low with each lift. "Not trying to hurt you. Not now." By the 4th hoof, the horse leaned into him, the slightest pressure, like gravity shifted. Jack didn't move until the leg was steady again. He laid his palm against the warm of the cannon bone, warmed more by the trust than the blood it held. Lily returned with 2 mugs and a wool scarf looped twice around her neck. "I heated the kitchen," she said. The pipes were knocking. She watched Jack blow on his tea, as if witnessing a rare migration, her father pausing, letting heat touch his face. "Do we call someone? A vet?" "We will, if he turns," Jack said. "Tonight we watch." He didn't mention money, though it flickered through his mind like a moth. The ranch insurance premium was past due. Last week he'd compared home insurance rates in town and felt his jaw tighten at the numbers. He wasn't about to lay that weight onto a girl who already carried more silence than a child should. He needs quiet more than needles. They took turns dozing on hay bales, waking at every shift. At some hour, the storm eased. The roof stopped ticking. The horse's breaths grew fuller, less like paper tearing, more like bellows filling. Lily slept with her cheek against her sleeve, lantern light painting her lashes gold. Jack rose and draped his coat over her shoulders. He checked the animal's gums. paler than he liked, but pinking. He pressed fingers against the jugular, counting. Slower now. The machine of life grinding back into gear. Toward dawn, a strange peace settled. Jack opened the barn door a hand's width. A blue seam of morning waited outside, the world muffled and new. The horse lifted its head, its ears pricked toward the slit of cold and light, then turned back to Jack, as if asking a question only a man could answer. The moment felt fragile as a bird in the hand. "You're safe," Jack said, the words fitting his mouth awkwardly and then not. He hesitated. In 5 years, he had not named a living thing on this property. Names were rope. But a thing that survives a night like this deserves something to be called back by. Lily stirred, sitting up, hair wild. "Did he eat again?" "A little." Jack set the mug aside. "We'll give him time." He touched the horse's neck, found the steady thrum there. "You earned it." Outside, the new snow shone as if lit from within, the pasture fence half swallowed by drifts. Lily stood at the doorway, the scarf lifted to her nose, her voice a mist. "He's beautiful," she said, "even like this." The horse watched her, then Jack, then the light beyond. A tremor worked through its muscles, not of fear, but memory. Body remembering the map of open country. Jack understood something simple and unsentimental. If the gate were open, the animal would go. That, too, was a kind of health. He latched the stall with hands that had shaped iron and buried dreams, and the sound wasn't final. It was faithful. "I'll head to town for saline and dressings," he said. "And oats. You sit with him. If his breath gets thin again, call me." Lily nodded, already turning the lantern wick down, already whispering to the horse about nothing important, how the stove took forever to catch, how the mail truck got stuck last week, how she thought the moon tonight might come out clear. The animal's ear tilted toward her, like a small sail finding wind. Jack shrugged into his coat. He paused at the threshold, one palm on the rough timber. In the stillness, he heard it. The horse's breathing, the faint crunch as Lily shifted her boots, the single drip of melted snow tapping metal. Nothing else. And yet the barn felt less empty than it had in half a decade. He looked back once more. The horse met his gaze. No plea, no promise, just a steady, living fact. The kind a man can build a day around. Jack tipped his head in a nod that said, "I see you," without the foolishness of saying it aloud. "I'll be right back," he told them both, the girl and the creature that had dragged a light into their dark. He pulled the door open to the pale morning and stepped into the cold, the white bright enough to sting. The hinge side closed behind him, and the barn settled into a quiet that wasn't loneliness. On the drive, the tires hummed a low tune. The road into town was clean-edged and empty, snow stacked in white pages along the ditches. Jack thought about gauze and oats, and the hardware store clerk who still asked about his wife in past tense, as if apologizing. He thought about how something as simple as veterinary care could upend his week's budget, and decided he'd pay in scrap iron if he had to. Some debts you shoulder gladly. When he reached the mailbox at the end of his lane, he braked. The flag was up, a silly crimson against all that white. Inside was a thin stack, a feed catalog, a church bulletin, and an envelope from the county with a window that showed his name. He slid the envelope into his pocket without opening it. One thing at a time. Back at the barn, Lily would be talking to the horse in her soft, practical way. Jack pictured the animal's ear turning toward her again, the stall like a hearth without fire. He pressed the accelerator, the truck threading, toward town, toward supplies, toward the long work of mercy that doesn't call itself by any name. He didn't know yet what the brand meant in the larger world, or how far a man might go to take back what he'd thrown away. He knew only this. Breath had steadied under his hand. Eyes had met his and not looked away. That would be enough to carry him to evening. And when evening came, he'd return with what a life needs: saline, bandage, grain, and with a stubborn belief he had thought he'd left out in the snow years ago. When Jack returned that afternoon, the sky had settled into a pale, glassy gray. The storm had burned itself out, leaving the world quiet and wide. His boots sank deep into the fresh drifts as he crossed the yard with a sack of feed on one shoulder and a bundle of clean dressings in the other. Through the open slat of the barn door, he could see Lily sitting beside the stall, humming softly. The tune was one he recognized. His wife's lullaby, the one she used to hum to calm restless foals. Inside, the air was warmer. The horse, no longer a heap of pain but a shape beginning to fill with breath, was standing, trembling slightly on his long legs. His coat, now brushed free of crusted blood, gleamed dark as wet chestnut. The lantern light found streaks of red in the mane, a copper glow that made the name come easy. "Raven," Lily said, without turning. "That's what he looks like. Strong, but lonely." Jack leaned against the post, setting down the feed. The name sat in the air, weightless but certain. He didn't correct her. He just nodded once. "Raven it is." They worked together in a rhythm that needed no talk. Jack changed the bandages on the wounds, pouring saline with a steady hand, the liquid glinting like mercury in the light. Lily held the horse's halter, whispering small, steady words. Raven flicked an ear toward her, then toward Jack, testing both voices. When the feed hit the trough, Raven lowered his head and began to eat. Slow, deliberate, like a soldier learning to trust the ground again. The sound filled the barn, grain crunching, breath steadying, the quiet work of healing that doesn't make headlines but still counts. Jack found himself watching, realizing how long it had been since he'd seen life return to anything under his care. The ranch had gone half silent after his wife died. Fences unrepaired, pasture left to weeds, every tool left where it had last been dropped. He'd moved through it like a ghost guarding another ghost's belongings. But now, there was movement. His daughter's laughter echoing off the rafters, the twitch of a tail, the creak of boards under weight that wasn't just his own. "You think he remembers who did this?" Lily asked. Jack looked at the brand on Raven's neck, the raised C like an accusation burned into skin. "Animals remember what hurts," he said, "but sometimes they forgive faster than people do." Lily traced the air above the scar without touching. "Mom used to say horses carry what we don't say out loud." Jack swallowed. He hadn't expected to hear his wife's name in this barn again. "She said a lot of things," he murmured. That night, as the wind softened outside, Jack brought an old radio from the house. The thing crackled with static but caught a country station from Jackson. A slow song filled the air, steel guitar, low voices about distance and coming home. Raven shifted, one ear tilting toward the sound, It was a small miracle. A wild creature listening to music. Lily smiled. He likes it. Jack poured himself coffee from a thermos, leaning on the stall gate. Or he's wondering what kind of fool sings at this hour. But the corner of his mouth lifted. Later, after Lily went to bed, he stayed behind, mending a loose plank near the door. Each hammer strike echoed like a heartbeat. Raven watched him from the shadows, eyes catching and holding the lamplight. It wasn't the look of an animal afraid. It was the look of something measuring the distance between captivity and care. Jack felt that stare under his skin. He spoke to fill the space it made. You've got some fight left in you. Good. You'll need it. Raven's breath steamed in the cold. The smell of hay and smoke mingled with the faint metallic tang of antiseptic. Jack spread fresh straw, pausing to flex his hand. The old scars across his knuckles ached when the temperature dropped, a souvenir from years of shoeing horses for men like Harker. Back then, the ranchers would brag about breaking wild ones, paying him extra for strong shoes, never asking what became of the horses that wouldn't break. He'd taken their money, kept his head down. Now, looking at Raven's branded neck, he felt that same money burn in his pocket like guilt. He rubbed his temples. Outside, a hawk screamed once, a sharp sound, carried clean through the cold. Raven's ears flicked up, then forward again. The stillness returned. Before heading inside, Jack checked the stall one last time. Raven had folded his legs beneath him, the way horses do when they finally feel safe enough to rest. The lamplight turned the straw around him to a field of gold. Jack reached out and turned down the flame until only a faint glow remained. At the door, he glanced back. The horse's breathing was deep now, chest rising with the rhythm of the living. In that slow tide, Jack found something like prayer. Unspoken, uneven, but real. He stepped outside. The night sky was clearing, a spill of stars sharp as frost. His breath fogged the air, and for the first time in years, he didn't curse the cold. He could smell the wood smoke from the chimney, hear the faint creak of the windmill turning. Home, but different. Inside the house, Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, one hand curled around the edge of a blanket that used to belong to her mother. Jack set his hat on the hook, poured a splash of whiskey into his coffee, and sat across from her. On the table lay the unopened envelope from the county. He looked at it for a long time, then slid it into a drawer. There'd be time for insurance payments and overdue bills tomorrow. Tonight, something else needed tending, something older and harder to name. He leaned back, eyes closing, the low hum of the radio filling the quiet. Outside, in the barn, Raven stirred once, snorted softly, and went still again. Two lives, side by side, breathing in rhythm across the thin wall of a winter night. By morning, the sun came up weak but golden, and the first tracks of a horse in fresh snow curved gently around the yard. Lily found them when she stepped outside to fetch water. They led only a few yards away from the barn door before circling back, as if the horse had tested freedom, then chosen to stay. When she told her father, Jack just grunted. But something eased in his shoulders, like a man remembering how to stand upright again. He went to the barn, opened the gate wide, and watched Raven lift his head. "You can go if you want," he said. The horse didn't move. Jack half smiled. Figured. He closed the gate again, careful, gentle. That afternoon, with the air warming just enough to smell the earth beneath the snow, Jack saddled the truck for a trip into town. There were things to ask about. Feed credit, a farrier's rasp, maybe information about that brand burned into Raven's hide. He paused before starting the engine, looking once toward the barn. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. The sky over Jackson Hole hung low that morning, pale and thin, like a sheet stretched too tight. Jack parked the truck near the feed store, engine ticking as it cooled. The town looked frozen in place. White rooftops, empty sidewalks, the faint smell of diesel and pine drifting from the mill. He wasn't a man who liked town anymore. People stared too long, or not at all. Either way, they remembered him as the blacksmith who lost his wife in the canyon fall, the man who stopped showing up at the rodeos, the man whose forge went dark. He climbed the steps of the store, the bell above the door ringing once. Inside, it smelled of grain, motor oil, and strong coffee. Behind the counter, Bill Kramer looked up from a newspaper. "Morning, Jack. Haven't seen you in a month." Jack gave a nod, eyes scanning the shelves. "Need antiseptic, salt blocks, and a bag of oats. Got a horse came in rough." Bill grinned, pouring coffee into a paper cup. "You? Taking in a horse again? World's turning then." Jack didn't smile. "Maybe. You still keep the brand registry?" Bill blinked. "For the county, yeah. Why?" Jack reached into his coat and drew the folded scrap of paper where he'd traced Raven's scar. The crude sea glared dark against the white. "Ever seen this?" Bill squinted. "Hell, that looks like Harker's mark. Big ranch out east near Riverton. You don't want trouble with that outfit." "I already have it," Jack said quietly. Bill lowered his voice. "Jack, they deal in auctions, not rescue work. Best let the law handle it. The law doesn't feed what they starve." He paid in cash, took the supplies, and left before Bill could answer. Back in the truck, he sat for a moment, letting the heater fight the cold creeping through his coat. Harker. He hadn't heard the name spoken aloud in years, but it carried weight, the kind that pressed down on a man's conscience. Jack started the engine and turned toward home, tires crunching over ice. By the time he reached the ranch, Lily was waiting on the porch, cheeks pink from the wind. "He's been moving more," she said before he could ask. "I opened the gate a little just to see if he'd walk. He didn't leave." Jack climbed down from the truck, setting the sack of feed at his feet. "Smart horse." Inside the barn, Raven stood alert, ears pricked, eyes clear. The wounds had begun to knit. Jack poured oats into the trough, then unwrapped the bandages to check the healing. The scar of the brand looked angrier today, the edges swollen where old tissue met new. He could almost feel the heat of the iron that had seared it there. Lily hovered beside him. Who would hurt an animal like that? Men who think they own what can't be owned. She frowned. Will they come for him? Jack's silence was its own answer. That night, a full moon rose over the hills, spilling silver through the barn slats. Jack sat on the bench near the stall, cleaning his tools. Old habit, steady work. The rhythmic scrape of the whetstone on steel filled the quiet. Raven watched every movement, nostrils flaring with each metallic spark. When the headlights appeared down the drive, Jack felt it before he saw it. A black SUV rolled through the gate, engine too smooth, lights too bright. Lily's voice called from the house, but he lifted a hand. Stay inside. The vehicle stopped beside the barn. A man stepped out, coat collar turned against the cold, shoes too clean for dirt roads. His smile was wrong before he even spoke. "Evening, Mr. Murdoch. I believe you've got something that belongs to me." Jack didn't move. "You're trespassing." The man looked past him, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Horse came from my ranch. Escaped during transport. Has my mark, as you know. I found him half dead in a snowdrift." "That's unfortunate," the man said smoothly. "But he's property, not charity. I've come to take him back." Jack's jaw tightened. "You leave now, or I'll call Sheriff Wade." The stranger's smile didn't change. "You think Nora Wade scares me?" He leaned closer, voice low. "Horses like that aren't meant for children's petting zoos. You don't understand the business, Murdoch. Better for everyone if you forget you ever saw him." Jack felt the old heat rising in his chest. The same fire that used to live in his forge. The kind that bends metal or men. "Get off my land," he said, the words slow and sharp. The man's gaze flicked to the barn, where Raven stood watching. "You think you can protect him? He'll bolt the first chance he gets." "Maybe," Jack said, "but not tonight." For a long moment, neither moved. Then the stranger shrugged, adjusting his gloves. "Suit yourself, but you'll see me again." He turned, boots crunching on frozen gravel, and slid back into the SUV. The taillights vanished into the dark, leaving behind only the echo of tires and the faint smell of exhaust. Jack stood there until the sound was gone. Only then did he exhale. Inside the barn, Raven snorted, stomping once, sensing the leftover tension. Jack stepped into the stall, resting a hand against the horse's neck. The muscle there quivered, but didn't flinch. "Looks like trouble knows your name, too," he murmured. Raven's ear flicked, the only answer. When he went back inside, Lily was waiting at the window. "Who was that?" "Someone who thinks money means ownership," Jack said. "Go on, get some sleep." She hesitated. "He won't come back, will he?" Jack forced a calm he didn't feel. "Not tonight." He waited until she'd gone to her room before he sat by the fire. The logs popped, sending sparks into the dim air. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Gray eyes hollow, jaw set. Outside, the wind had picked up again, brushing against the house like a warning. He reached for his wife's photo on the mantel, her smile forever caught in sunlight. "You'd tell me to stay out of it," he whispered. "But you'd have saved him too." The clock ticked past midnight. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote called. One long, lonely note, swallowed by the cold. Jack closed his eyes, listening. The sound didn't speak of danger this time. It sounded like a vow. In the barn, Raven pawed at the straw. Restless. The mark on his neck glowed faintly where the moonlight touched it. A scar, yes, but also a map. Every pain leaves a trail, if a man's willing to follow it. Chapter 5. Eyes Between Two Worlds. The next morning rose clear and viciously cold. Frost webbed across the kitchen window, and the light had that hard white edge that makes every sound sharper. Jack poured coffee into a tin mug and stood at the stove, listening to the silence of a house that still felt half asleep. Lily came in, hair tangled, wearing her mother's old flannel shirt. "Did he sleep?" she asked. Jack nodded toward the window. "Did better than I did." The barn waited beyond the frosted glass, its roof glittering like hammered silver. Jack pulled on his coat and stepped into the day. The snow squeaked under his boots, each step sending up a ghost of steam. Inside the barn, Raven was already on his feet, head turned toward the sound of the door. His coat caught the light, deep brown now, that the blood and grime were gone, and his breath smoked in the chill air. "Morning," Jack said. The horse flicked an ear. He filled the bucket with warm water and watched Raven drink, the muscles in the big neck moving like waves under skin. When Lily joined him, she carried a small brush. "He let me touch him yesterday," she said softly. "Just here." She reached toward the horse's shoulder. Raven tensed, but she didn't pull back. Her fingers traced the air above his hide, never quite touching. "He's scared of hands, not people." Jack studied the horse for a long moment. The eyes were what struck him most. Dark, reflective, full of a kind of intelligence that had nothing to do with obedience. "Scared or remembering," he said. "Same thing," Lily whispered. That afternoon, a wind came off the ridges, dry and strong enough to lift the snow into thin curtains. Jack went out to check the fence lines, the old wire sagging under ice. The quiet gave him too much room for thinking. Harker's man had left tracks that morning. He'd driven past the gate slow enough to make a point. The memory of that smug smile stuck like grit in his teeth. When Jack returned, he found Lily sitting in the stall, knees pulled up, talking to Raven in the low, even tone her mother used to use when life was kind. "You don't owe anyone anything," she was saying. "Not him, not us." Raven's ears twitched, then settled. The horse stepped closer, lowering his head until his muzzle hovered just above her shoulder. Lily froze. For one breath, two, and then she lifted her hand and laid it against his cheek. The air between them seemed to hold its own heartbeat. Jack stood in the doorway, the sight tightening something deep in his chest. The girl's hand, the animal's stillness. It was like watching two storms learn each other's rhythm. He didn't speak until Raven stepped back again. "Good work," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything," she said. "Exactly." That night, they left the stall door open, just in case the horse wanted space. Jack sat on the bench outside the barn, the stars sharp and endless overhead. Raven stood half in the moonlight, half in shadow, watching the open field. "You thinking about running?" Jack asked, not expecting an answer. The horse's ears turned toward him, then back toward the hills. "Can't blame you." He looked down at his hands. "Freedom's a fine thing. It's just harder when you've got nowhere to go." Behind him, the door creaked. Lily came out, wrapped in a blanket, her breath visible in the cold. "He's calmer when you talk to him," she said. Jack chuckled without humor. "Most folks say the opposite." "Maybe you just needed someone to listen," she said, sitting beside him. They stayed like that, quiet, watching the horse shift his weight from one leg to the other, his breath a cloud in the moonlight. The barn light behind them flickered once, then steadied. Later, when Jack finally turned in, he dreamed, not of his wife's accident, as he usually did, but of the way her laughter had filled the same barn years ago. She had stood where Lily now sat, coaxing a wild colt to take sugar from her palm. He remembered how she'd looked over her shoulder and said, "They're mirrors, Jack. They show us what we can't hide." When he woke, the dream clung to him like smoke. He dressed quietly, checked his phone for messages, found none. On the newsfeed, an article headline caught his eye. Wyoming Ranch, under investigation for animal cruelty. The name leapt off the screen. Harker Ranch. No details, just a photo of a long fence disappearing into fog. Jack stared at it for a long moment before closing the app. Maybe justice had a pulse after all. The following evening, the wind changed direction. Ravens, real ones, circled above the tree line, their cries echoing through the valley. Lily pointed them out through the barn window. "Do you think they're looking for him?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "They follow weather, not names." Still, as he watched them drift and wheel against the dying light, he thought of signs and omens, of the strange geometry of loss and return. Inside the stall, Raven shifted restlessly, eyes darting to the window. His reflection doubled in the glass. A wild creature, inside a man-made box, staring out at his own ghost. Jack unlatched the door, pushing it open enough for cold air to spill in. "You want to see the sky? Go on." Raven hesitated, then stepped forward, one hoof crunching the frost. He moved slow, testing the ground, until he stood beneath the stars. The moon glazed his coat with copper light, the brand on his neck glinting faintly. He snorted, then threw his head back and let out a sharp, clean cry that rolled down the valley like thunder. It wasn't pain. Not anymore. It was a declaration. Lily gasped softly behind Jack. "What's he doing?" "Remembering," Jack said. The horse pawed at the snow, breath flaring white, then turned and walked back into the barn of his own accord. Lily exhaled, the tension easing from her shoulders. "He came back." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the night settle around them. "Sometimes that's all the proof you get." They closed the door against the cold. The fire in the house still glowed through the kitchen window, a small square of warmth in the dark. For the first time since the blizzard, Jack thought he saw the shape of something that might one day be peace. The next day came with sunlight as thin as a blade. Jack was mending a broken hinge on the pasture gate when a dark SUV kicked up a cloud of powder on the road. For a heartbeat, his chest tightened, expecting the return of Harker's men. But the vehicle that stopped carried a flash of blue light on its dash and a familiar shape in the driver's seat. Sheriff Nora Wade stepped out, brushing frost from her uniform sleeve. She looked different than he remembered. Older, the years carved gently into the corners of her eyes, but those eyes still carried the same alert steadiness. "Morning, Jack," she said. "Heard some noise about Harker sniffing around again?" Jack straightened. "His man came by last night. Wanted the horse back." "Wanted or threatened?" Jack gave a humorless smile. "Both." Nora sighed, her breath curling in the cold. "You always did pick the hard fights." She glanced toward the barn. "Can I see him?" Inside, Raven lifted his head as they entered, nostrils flaring at the scent of the sheriff's leather boots. "He's a beauty," she said softly. "But that mark is Harker's," Jack finished. "I looked it up." Nora crouched near the stall, careful to keep distance. The horse studied her, not afraid but wary. "I can open an investigation, but you know what that means. Paperwork, time, and Harker's lawyers breathing down our necks. He's got half the county in his pocket." Jack leaned against the beam. "And the other half?" "They've got bills, mortgages, a lot to lose." "Same as me," he said. "But I'm not selling my soul for quiet." Nora straightened, brushing hay from her knee. "You haven't changed." "I have, Jack said. "Just not in the direction people like Harker hoped." For a long moment, they stood in the still air of the barn. Outside, the wind moaned through the fences, the sound like an old train whistle carrying across snow. Nora looked at him and said, "I'll file it, but I can't promise protection if he pushes back." "Don't need protection," Jack replied. "Need someone who remembers what right looks like." She gave him a small, knowing smile. "That's still expensive around here." When she left, Lily came running from the house, cheeks flushed. "Was that the sheriff?" Jack nodded. "She's going to look into it." "Will that stop them?" He thought of Harker's car, the way its headlights had cut across the dark like a weapon. "Maybe not, but it'll slow them down." That night, Lily baked cornbread from an old recipe book, the smell filling the house. They ate in silence, listening to the radio murmur weather updates. Another front was coming down from the north. More snow, more cold. Jack thought about supplies, hay, the woodpile running low. He made a note to check home heating repair services in town, but knew he couldn't afford any right now. After dinner, he went to the barn. Raven was restless, pacing the stall. The horse turned when Jack entered, eyes dark and gleaming in the lamplight. "Storm's on its way," Jack said, stroking the coarse mane. "Seems we can't go a week without one." Raven exhaled through flared nostrils, the warm breath fogging against Jack's sleeve. The bond between them had become something wordless, a quiet understanding built from shared stubbornness. Appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her blanket. "Can I stay out here tonight?" she asked. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "As long as you keep near the stove." She spread her blanket on the hay and sat cross-legged, humming under her breath. Raven's ears twitched toward the sound. Jack returned to fixing the broken halter strap, listening. The tune she hummed was the same one his wife used to hum years ago, when Lily was small enough to sleep in her lap. He wondered if his daughter remembered, or if some songs just live in blood. When the wind began to climb, Jack shut the barn door tight. Snow dust swirled in the seams of the wood, but inside it was warm with the glow of lamplight. Raven shifted, tail swishing softly, eyes catching the fire's reflection. Lily looked up. "Do you think Mom would have liked him?" Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, she would have seen the fight in him." "She always liked things that fought to live," Lily said. "Maybe that's why she married me," he murmured, almost to himself. Lily smiled, small and tired. "Maybe." The night deepened. Jack checked the latch twice before heading inside to rest. When he woke hours later, the wind had gone feral. Through the window he could see the barn lights still burning, a soft yellow pulse in the storm. He pulled on his coat and went out. Snow stung his face, blinding. By the time he reached the barn, the door had come loose, banging in the gusts. Inside, the world was chaos. Raven rearing, eyes wide, Lily standing in the corner shouting, "He's scared of the noise!" Jack grabbed the rope, steadying his footing in the straw. "Easy, boy, easy!" He stepped close, placing a hand on the horse's neck. Raven trembled, but didn't strike. The storm's howl filled the rafters, shaking the whole structure. Jack could feel the animal's heart hammering under his palm, wild and alive. Lily watched, tears cutting clean lines down her dusty cheeks. "He thought you left him." Jack glanced at her, realizing she was right. The memory of being abandoned burned into the creature's nerves, the same way it had burned into his own. He lowered his voice. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The horse stilled, breath ragged, until the only sound was wind and their breathing. Jack felt the tension drain away like water seeping into earth. He rubbed the horse's neck, speaking softly, a steady stream of words that meant nothing but carried warmth. When the storm finally broke, the three of them, man, girl, and horse, stood in the pale quiet left behind. Jack leaned against the beam, exhausted. Lily wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. "He believes you now." "Maybe," Jack said. "Maybe we both needed to hear it." By dawn, the world outside was buried again, but the barn stood solid, every plank holding. The sheriff's truck tracks had been erased by snow, as if the visit had been a dream. Yet something had shifted. Jack could feel it, in his bones, in the horse's steady breathing, in the soft strength returning to his daughter's eyes. He hung his coat by the stove and looked back at the stall. "We made it through another one," he said quietly. Raven lifted his head, and for an instant the scar on his neck caught the first light of morning, glowing not like a wound, but like a promise. The days that followed blurred together, quiet and brittle, like thin ice over a deep river. Snow melted enough for the ground to show through in muddy patches, and for a brief moment, Jack let himself think maybe winter was giving up. Raven had started to fill out again, his coat shining darker, his muscles showing under the ribs that had once looked like shadows. Lily brushed him every morning before school, and the horse would lower his head toward her shoulder, trusting her more each day. But quiet never stays long in a place where cruelty has roots. It started with a phone call late in the afternoon. Jack had been in the shed repairing an old horseshoe mold when the landline rang, a sound so rare it startled him. He wiped his hands and answered. The line was full of static, then a man's voice. Calm, low, deliberate. "Mr. Murdoch, word is you've got one of ours." Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Ranchers talk," the voice went on. "You might think a barn out in the sticks keeps secrets, but fences don't stop eyes. You've had your fun, patched up what's broken. But that horse, he's not yours to keep." Jack said nothing. "You've got until sundown," the man said. "After that, accidents happen. Out there, nobody hears a fire until it's too late." Then the line went dead. Jack stood there, the dial tone humming in his ear. Outside, the light was already fading to that red-gray color that meant another cold night. He hung up slowly, then went to the window. Across the yard, Lily was laughing at Raven's stubborn attempt to nibble her sleeve. The sight both comforted and terrified him. He didn't tell her about the call. Instead, he finished his repairs, made dinner as usual, and locked every door. When Lily went to bed, he pulled the rifle from the rack above the fireplace and loaded it quietly. The rhythm of the shells sliding into the chamber sounded too much like a countdown. By midnight, the sky had gone dark as ink, the wind pressing against the house in long sighs. Jack sat by the window with the rifle across his lap. He could see the barn lantern flickering through the frost, steady, brave, like a heartbeat. The first smell reached him before the sound, smoke, faint but sharp, cutting through the scent of snow. Then came the flicker. Orange, quick, wrong. He bolted from the chair, out the door, boots punching through crusted drifts. The barn roof was alight. Flames crawled up the beams like tongues. Raven screamed, a sound that split the night clean in half. Jack hit the door shoulder first. Wood splintering under his weight. The inside was chaos, heat, smoke, shadows jerking in the firelight. Raven was thrashing, eyes wild, the stall gate warped shut by heat. "Easy!" Jack shouted, voice lost in the roar. He grabbed the rope from a peg and looped it around the latch, siege, yanking hard. The wood cracked, but held. Sparks landed on his coat, sizzling holes through the fabric. Then another voice. Lily's. "Dad!" She was in the doorway, eyes wide in the orange glow. Jack's stomach turned to ice. "Get back in the house! I can help! Now!" She hesitated, but another crash overhead sent a beam down between them, showering sparks. She ducked out of sight. Jack coughed, smoke clawing at his throat, vision blurring. He pulled again, the rope cutting into his palms. Finally, the latch tore free. The stall door swung open, and Raven surged forward, almost knocking him off his feet. The horse burst through the smoke, out into the yard, body a blur of dark motion against the fire. Jack stumbled after him, falling to one knee in the snow. The cold bit into his skin, saving him from fainting. He looked back. The barn was a furnace now, roof collapsing inward. He saw movement near the far fence, a truck's taillights disappearing into the trees. "They were here!" he gasped. "They did this!" Lily ran from the porch, tears streaking her sooty face. "Dad, are you—" "I'm fine. Get back!" He turned, scanning the field. Raven stood at the edge of the yard, silhouetted against the fire. The reflection of the flames danced across his coat, turning him almost bronze. For a second, he looked like something ancient and unbreakable. Then he turned and bolted into the darkness beyond the fence. "Raven!" Lily screamed. Jack caught her before she could chase. "No, you can't. He'll find open ground." "But he's hurt." "He'll survive," Jack said, though his voice cracked around the words. By dawn, the barn was nothing but black skeletons and drifting smoke. The snow around it had melted into patches of dark mud, steaming faintly in the cold. Jack sifted through the wreckage in silence. When he found Lily's old saddle, warped, the leather peeled like bark, he sat down hard on a beam and covered his face. Lily stood nearby, arms wrapped tight around herself. "He'll come back," she said softly. Jack didn't answer. The fire had taken more than wood and tools. It had stolen the fragile peace they'd built. But in the ashes, something else stirred, a kind of fury he hadn't felt in years. He stood, brushing soot from his hands. "We'll find him," he said. "And whoever did this." Lily nodded, her eyes dry now, fierce. "We will." Jack looked at the horizon, where the sunrise bled faintly through the smoke. Somewhere out there, Raven was running through snow and pine, carrying scars that burned like his own. He turned toward the house. "Pack warm clothes. We're heading to town." "Why?" Lily asked. "Because people like Harker think no one will stand up to them," Jack said. "It's time someone proved them wrong." As they left, the wind shifted, blowing the last of the smoke east toward the mountains. The ruins of the barn hissed softly, cooling into silence. But from the tree line came a faint sound. A horse's cry, distant but alive. Lily froze. "Did you hear that?" Jack listened. The wind carried it again, a low, steady call like a promise made and kept. He smiled for the first time that morning. "Yeah," he said, "he's still out there." By the time the sheriff's truck arrived, the barn was already a husk of smoke and memory. Nora stepped out, scarf wrapped tight against the wind, her boots sinking into the ashy snow. Jack stood beside what used to be the south wall, his face streaked with soot, his eyes hollow but steady. Lily was huddled in a blanket near the porch, her small frame shaking though not from cold. "Jack," Nora said quietly, "you should have called sooner." "There wasn't time," he replied. "They lit it and ran." She looked past him at the wreckage. "You sure it wasn't the stove?" Jack turned his head, the movement sharp. "You know better." Nora sighed, rubbing her glove against her chin. "I had to ask. You've got no witnesses, no cameras, no proof." "I've got a phone call," Jack said. "Threats. Voice I didn't know." "That helps," she said, though her tone didn't sound convinced. "But without a recording—" Jack crouched and picked up a half-burned horseshoe, the metal still warm in his palm. "They were sending a message." "Then message received," Nora said, her gaze softening. "You and Lily need to get somewhere safe for a few days." He shook his head. "I'm not running." "Jack, this isn't stubbornness. It's survival." "Maybe they think they burned my courage along with the barn," he said, voice low. "But they didn't." Nora studied him, then glanced toward Lily. The girl sat silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. "What about her?" the sheriff asked. Jack followed her gaze. The wind moved through the field, dragging thin veils of smoke. "She's stronger than she looks." They stood there in the settling quiet until Nora finally said, "I'll start paperwork, but don't expect quick results. Harker's got lawyers for every kind of weather." "Then maybe it's time someone brought a storm," Jack said. She left him with that. When night fell, the ranch was darker than he'd ever known. Without the barn lights, the yard looked hollow, like a mouth missing its teeth. Jack and Lily slept on the couch near the fire, the air thick with the smell of smoke. Every time the wind rattled the window, she flinched. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think Raven knows the way back?" "He does," Jack said. "The wild always remembers where it was cared for. Will they go after him too?" He looked into the flames. "If they find him before we do." Neither spoke again. At dawn, a thin fog crawled out of the valley. Jack stepped outside, coffee steaming in his hand. The barn was nothing but black bones under frost. When he crouched, he saw hoof prints leading away toward the timber line. Deep at first, then lighter as they climbed. He followed them a few yards, stopping when the ground grew too uneven. He felt the silence press against him like weight. "Raven," he called softly, though he knew the sound wouldn't carry far. Behind him, Lily appeared, wrapped in his old jacket. "He's out there," she said, pointing toward the ridge. "I heard him last night." Jack looked where she pointed. The forest stood still, the pines dark against a rising sun. Maybe she'd dreamed it. Maybe not. They packed the truck before noon. Blankets, feed, rope, and the few tools left untouched by fire. As they loaded the last of it, a shadow fell across the yard. Nora's patrol SUV pulled in again. "Heading somewhere?" she asked. Jack tightened the rope around the feed sack. "Toward the North Ridge. That's where his tracks go." "You planning to bring him back alone?" "I'm planning to make sure he's alive," Jack said, "and maybe learn who thinks they can burn me off my own land." Nora folded her arms. "Harker's boys won't stop. I can't protect you out there." "I'm not asking you to." Her eyes narrowed. "You've got that look again, Jack. The one that ends with trouble and bad headlines." He half smiled. "Headlines don't scare me anymore." "Then take this," she said, pulling a small radio from her coat. "Channel 6. Call if you need me." He took it, nodded once, and climbed into the truck. Lily slid beside him. As they drove out, Nora watched until the road bent and swallowed them. Then she exhaled, muttering, "God help the ones who stand in his way." The drive north wound through ravines and frozen creeks. The mountains rose ahead, jagged and bright, their tips cutting into low clouds. Jack's mind drifted between memory and plan. He thought about the call, the way the voice had sounded calm, almost polite, the kind of cruelty that believes itself civilized. They stopped near dusk, at a frozen creek. Lily pointed to a fresh set of prints in the snow, deep, deliberate, unshod. Raven. The trail led up toward the line of dark timber. Jack knelt, pressing his hand into one of the impressions. The snow was still powdery at the edges. He's close. They made camp in the truck bed, wrapped in blankets. The air smelled of pine sap and smoke from the small fire Jack built in an old oil drum. Lily warmed her hands over it. "Mom used to say the stars mean something different for everyone," she said. "What do they mean for you?" Jack looked up. The sky was crowded with them, bright and sharp. "Directions," he said. "They tell me where I've been. Not sure they care where I'm going." "Maybe they're watching over us," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "If they are, they've got their work cut out." Sometime near midnight, a sound broke the quiet. A single, low whinny carried down from the ridge. Lily sat up instantly. Jack's heart jumped. He stood, scanning the dark, eyes straining to catch movement between the trees. Another sound followed, the soft crunch of hooves on frozen ground. Then, through the shadows, came the shape he'd almost stopped believing he'd see again. Raven stepped into the circle of firelight, steam curling from his nostrils. The horse looked thinner, streaked with ash along his flanks, but alive. "Raven," Lily breathed. Jack moved slowly, hand out. "You made it, boy." Raven stopped a few paces away, tail flicking, eyes bright with wild recognition. Then, as if deciding the distance was no longer needed, he closed it in 3 steps, pressing his muzzle into Jack's chest. The man's breath caught. He wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, feeling the solid life beneath the scars. "You found your way back," he whispered. Lily joined them, laughing through tears. "I told you he would." Jack looked at her, the firelight painting her face gold. "You were right." They stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of them in the circle of warmth and smoke, while the cold world around them went quiet. When dawn came, Jack stood and looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks was Harker's ranch, the place that had branded pain into Raven's flesh and tried to erase anyone who cared. "Ready?" Lily asked. Jack nodded, tightening his coat. "We're not running anymore. We're finishing this." The morning after they found Raven was clearer than any Jack could remember. The air had a strange stillness, like the land itself was holding its breath. Smoke from their fire had drifted away, leaving only the smell of pine and frost. Jack poured coffee from the old tin pot, steam rising in white curls, while Lily brushed ash off the horse's coat. Raven stood quiet, head low, chewing a handful of oats. The brand on his neck caught the sun, a reminder carved by cruelty. Jack touched the mark gently, not to hurt, but to understand. "He's telling us something," he said. Lily looked up. "What do you mean?" That brand, it's proof. Whatever they were doing, they wanted to keep track of him. You don't mark a horse like that unless you're running a system. She frowned. Then we should show it to Sheriff Wade. He nodded slowly. We will. But first I want to see where it came from. They packed their gear into the truck, tied Raven to the rear hitch, and followed the road east toward Riverton, where Harker Ranch sprawled across miles of fenced land. As they drove, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow to glitter. Jack's mind replayed the fire, the phone call, the way Harker's man had smiled like it was all a game. Halfway down the highway, a pickup passed them, heading the opposite direction. Its driver gave a long, deliberate look as they crossed paths. Jack saw the brand logo on the truck door. Harker Livestock and Training. His knuckles tightened on the wheel. By the time they reached the outskirts of Riverton, the sky had dulled again, clouds gathering over the ridges. They stopped at a diner, a squat building painted green and white, the kind where coffee is strong and gossip stronger. Inside, the bell jingled as they entered. Nora Wade was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hat off, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked up, surprised. Jack? Lily? What brings you to town? Jack slid into the seat opposite her. Evidence. He pulled out his phone, showing a picture he'd taken that morning, the brand close up, the lines clear as a signature. Nora's eyes darkened. That's Harker's mark, all right. I want to see his ranch, Jack said. She shook her head. That's not how it works. You don't just walk in and accuse a man like Harker without a warrant. I'm not accusing, he said. I'm confirming. Jack, she sighed. You've already had one fire. You really want to start another? Maybe that's the only way to make people look. There was a pause between them, heavy as snow on a roof. Finally, Nora leaned forward, lowering her voice. I've been digging. State investigators have had whispers about his operation, something about illegal auctions, selling Mustangs out of sanctuaries. Nothing proven. If what you've got can tie him to cruelty or smuggling, it's the break they've been waiting for. Then let's give it to them, Jack said. Slow down, she cautioned. Harker's got guards, cameras, lawyers. You go near that place and they'll make you disappear into paperwork. Or worse. Jack's gaze didn't waver. I'm not looking for permission. Nora leaned back, studying him. You were always a man who couldn't walk past a fight. Fine. I'll buy you an hour. But after that, I'm sending deputies. Lily's hand slipped into her father's. We'll be careful, she said. Don't promise what you can't keep, Nora muttered, standing. They left the diner and turned toward the mountains. The closer they got, the quieter it became. No birds, no cattle, just wind sweeping over snow. When the fence line finally appeared, it looked endless. A metal sign hung crooked on the gate. Harker Livestock. Private property. Jack parked the truck behind a rise. Stay here, he told Lily. I'm not waiting in the car, she said. You are this time. She crossed her arms, jaw tight. You can't keep me safe from everything. I can try. His voice cracked a little, but the tone left no room for argument. She stayed. Jack climbed the fence, boots crunching softly. Raven followed, moving, beside him like a shadow. They reached the ridge overlooking a long barnyard. Down below, men moved in the snow, loading crates into trailers. Each crate was filled with movement, horses, packed too tight, eyes wide with panic. Jack's stomach turned. He could hear their hooves striking wood, their muffled whinnies cutting through the cold. Good God, he whispered. He snapped a few photos with his phone, zooming in on the brand marks visible on their flanks. Dozens of them, the same as Raven's. Then a voice barked from behind. "Hey, this is private land." Jack turned. Two men in ranch coats stood 10 feet away, rifles slung loose but ready. "I was just passing through," Jack said. "Yeah? Then why the camera?" Jack slipped the phone into his coat. "Just like keeping pretty pictures." One of them stepped forward, smirking. "Harker don't like photographers. Maybe we ought to take that off your hands." Before they could close in, a sharp whistle echoed from below. The men froze, exchanging glances. "Boss wants us," one muttered. They turned back, leaving Jack in the snow. He exhaled slowly, every nerve tight. Raven nickered softly, his breath rising like smoke. "We got what we came for," Jack said. "Let's move." They made it back to the truck without being seen again. Lily's relief came out in one shaky laugh. "I told you not to get caught." "Guess I'm still learning." They drove back toward town in silence. The phone sat on the seat between them, a small, glowing secret. When they reached the outskirts, Jack pulled over by the river bridge. The wind had picked up again, scattering flakes into the air. "We'll give this to Nora," he said. "She'll know what to do." Lily nodded, hugging her knees. "Dad, what if they come after us again?" He looked at her and said the only honest thing he could. "Then we keep standing. Just like him." He nodded toward Raven in the rearview mirror. The horse's head was turned slightly, watching them through the snow, calm but alert, the look of something that had already seen the worst of men and survived it. As dusk settled, the first town lights appeared ahead, faint as fireflies. Jack shifted gears, his jaw set. Somewhere behind those mountains, men like Harker were counting money and erasing lives. But now he had proof, and the quiet fury of a man who'd run out of fear. The sky over Riverton broke open that evening, thick with a snowstorm that felt more like a warning than weather. The flakes weren't gentle. They came in slanting sheets, stinging Jack's face as he stepped out of the sheriff's office. Behind him, Nora Wade stood framed in the doorway, the glow of her desk lamp cutting through the gloom. "I'll send the photos to the state investigators tonight," she said. "But you've stirred up a nest, Jack. You need to lie low." He pulled his hat lower against the wind. "Harker won't wait for paperwork," she sighed, pulling her coat tighter. "You're right. But whatever you're planning, don't do it alone." Jack turned toward the truck. "I haven't been alone for a while now." Raven stamped in the snow beside the hitch, breath steaming. Lily sat inside the cab, watching them both. Nora's eyes softened. "You've got your father's stubborn streak, Lily. Keep him from doing anything stupid." Lily smiled faintly. "That's a full-time job, Sheriff." The radio crackled from Nora's belt, dispatch chatter about road closures and downed power lines. She gave a final nod. "Watch yourselves. Harker won't forgive being embarrassed." They drove out into the storm, the world shrinking to the tunnel of light carved by the headlights. The road coiled along the ridgeline, snow piling fast against the windshield. Raven followed close, his dark form barely visible in the rear-view mirror. Jack gripped the wheel tight, the muscles in his forearm jumping with every turn. Lily broke the silence. "What if the state doesn't believe you?" "They will." "And if they don't?" Jack's jaw flexed. "Then I'll show them what belief looks like." A gust of wind hit the truck broadside, jolting it sideways. He fought the skid, tires squealing, and managed to keep them on the road. "Easy," he muttered, more to himself than the vehicle. They reached the crest of the ridge just as a pair of headlights appeared behind them. Close, too close. Jack checked the mirror. The lights didn't fall back. "That's not good," he said. Lily twisted around. "Is it Harker?" "Stay down." Jack pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward, the engine roaring. The pursuing vehicle matched speed. A gunshot cracked through the blizzard, the rear window shattering into frost and glass. Lily screamed. Jack jerked the wheel, the truck fishtailing before finding grip again. "Hang on!" He cut the headlights and veered onto the side trail that wound down toward the valley. Snow blinded them, the world reduced to white chaos. The pursuing headlights followed for a moment, then vanished behind a drift. When the road leveled, Jack slowed, breathing hard. "You okay?" Lily nodded, shaking but unhurt. "What about Raven?" Jack pulled over and jumped out. The wind tore at his coat as he circled to the back. The rope was empty, snapped clean. His stomach dropped. He scanned the darkness, shouting, "Raven!" For a long moment, only the storm answered. Then, faintly, through the roar of wind, came the sound of hooves striking ice. Jack followed it uphill, his boots slipping on the frozen ground. The snow thinned enough for him to see the silhouette. A horse, standing against the white fury, mane whipping, eyes glowing like embers. Raven. The animal turned his head, spotting him, and trotted closer. Jack caught the frayed end of the rope, relief cutting through the cold. "You keep saving me, you know that?" Back at the truck, Lily clutched the rifle he'd given her, knuckles white. "I saw them turn off the main road," she said. "They're heading toward the quarry." Jack followed her gaze. In the distance, dim lights flickered through the snow, headlamps bouncing off machinery and metal. "That's Harker's crew," he said, "probably hiding what's left of their operation." Lily's voice trembled. "You can't go down there." "I have to. If we let them vanish, everything burns for nothing." She grabbed his sleeve. "Then I'm coming too." He looked at her for a long time, seeing the same steel in her eyes that once belonged to her mother. "Stay behind me," he said finally. They moved through the storm, keeping to the tree line. The quarry opened below them like a wound in the earth, floodlights casting hard shadows over a cluster of trucks. Men were loading crates into a trailer, shouting over the wind. Jack raised the binoculars. Inside one of the open crates, he saw movement. Horses, thin and shaking, muzzled and blindfolded. His voice turned to gravel. "They're moving them tonight." Raven pawed at the snow beside him, nostrils flaring. Jack placed a hand on his neck. "Not yet, boy. Not yet." They watched as one of the men approached the trailer. Caleb Harker himself, unmistakable even from a distance. His hair, once perfectly groomed, was slicked back by the wet snow, but his posture was still pure arrogance. He barked orders to his men, gesturing toward the horses. Jack felt something cold and clean slide into place inside him, a kind of focus he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife. "Lily," he said softly, "call Nora on the radio. Tell her what we found." Lily fumbled with the dial, static bursting through before a clear tone caught. "Sheriff Wade, we found them. The quarry off Route 89. There's—" The signal cut out, replaced by a high squeal. Jack cursed. "They've jammed it." A shout came from below. One of Harker's men had spotted them, pointing up toward the ridge. The floodlights swung in their direction. "Run!" Jack grabbed Lily's hand, sprinting back toward the truck. Shots cracked, snow exploding around their feet. Raven wheeled and bolted beside them, muscles bunching like thunder under his hide. They reached the truck just as bullets ripped through the side mirror. Jack shoved Lily inside, slammed the door, and vaulted into the driver's seat. "Hold on." He gunned the engine. The tires spun, caught, and launched them forward. Raven galloped alongside, keeping pace even as the truck barreled down the slope. The quarry lights vanished behind them, swallowed by the storm. For a few miles, all they could hear was the howl of wind and the relentless rhythm of hooves outside the window. When they finally reached open highway, Jack slowed, pulling the truck to a stop. The adrenaline drained out of him, leaving his hands shaking. Lily leaned her head against the seat, eyes wet. "We can't fight them like this," she said. "They'll kill us." Jack stared out at the endless white stretching ahead. "We're not fighting them alone anymore," he said. They made sure of that. He held up his phone, the camera light still blinking. "I got everything we need." Outside, Raven stood in the snow, sides heaving but proud. The storm began to break, clouds thinning just enough for a thin band of moonlight to slice through. Jack stepped out, walking up to the horse. "We're almost there," he whispered, resting his forehead against Raven's. "One more storm, then we go home." Raven's breath was warm against his cheek. Somewhere far off, sirens began to echo, faint, then growing louder. Nora was coming. Jack turned back to the truck, his daughter waiting, the horse beside him, the storm around them finally losing its teeth. For the first time, the fight didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. When morning came, the storm was gone, leaving the world stripped bare. Snow stretched unbroken to the horizon, and the air felt so still that every sound seemed to echo. Jack stood beside the truck, his coat stiff with frost, looking toward the distant mountains where Harker's quarry lay buried beneath the fog. He'd driven all night, following the faint pulse of sirens behind them until the lights of Timber Falls appeared like scattered stars across the valley. Nora met them at the edge of town, her SUV half covered in snow. She stepped out, face drawn from lack of sleep, but sharp with purpose. "You've stirred up a war," she said, handing him a thermos of coffee. "But the photos did their job. The state's on its way." Jack nodded, too tired for relief. "How long?" "They'll reach Riverton by dusk. I've already called in every deputy I trust. We'll surround the ranch before dark." Lily climbed out of the truck, pulling her hat low against the cold. Raven followed, tethered loosely, his breath clouding the air. Nora watched the horse and shook her head. "He's tougher than most people I know." Jack glanced at her. "He's been through worse." They moved as a convoy by late afternoon. 3 sheriff's trucks, 1 federal van, and Jack's battered pickup bringing up the rear. The road wound through canyons chiseled from ice. Jack drove in silence, Lily beside him, Nora's voice crackling over the radio, giving updates on positions. The plan was simple: close in before Harker's men could flee. But Jack knew simple plans had a way of breaking. By the time they reached the perimeter of Harker Ranch, dusk was bleeding into night. Floodlights flickered on over the fields, throwing long, crooked shadows. Beyond the main barn, trucks were idling, engines puffing white plumes. The deputies fanned out, rifles ready, their boots crunching over snow. Jack climbed down, scanning the horizon. He could feel Raven's tension through the rope, the horse's muscles taut under his dark coat. Lily stayed in the truck, face pale behind the glass. Nora came up beside him. "We'll move in from the west gate," she said. No heroics, Jack. You stay behind me. Wasn't planning on anything else. Good, she said, though she didn't sound convinced. They started forward, the wind cutting sharp lines across their cheeks. Inside the barn, a generator hummed, and a man's voice shouted orders. Then came a sound that froze everyone in place. The heavy clang of a door slamming, followed by a low, terrified chorus of neighs. "Inside," Nora ordered. They breached the barn in one motion, doors banging open to reveal rows of cages and tethered horses, each one marked, shaking under harsh light. And standing in the center of it all, wrapped in a long black coat, was Caleb Harker. His expression was calm, almost serene, as if he'd been expecting them. "Well," he said, voice smooth as oil, "the cavalry finally arrives." Nora raised her badge. "This property's under investigation. Step away from the animals." Harker smiled thinly. "You think you can walk in here waving small-town authority and shut me down? These horses are registered assets, everyone documented and paid for. You'll have to do better than sympathy." Jack stepped forward before Nora could stop him. "You call torture paperwork now?" Harker's eyes slid toward him. "Ah, the blacksmith. I wondered when you'd crawl back. That horse of yours, he's proof of what discipline can make. You should thank me for hardening him." Jack's fists clenched, the tendons standing out in his wrists. "You broke him." "I perfected him," Harker said. "But I see now, you'd rather keep him wild, same as your wife did. She never understood strength either." The words struck like a physical blow. Nora's hand shot out, but Jack was already moving. He crossed the space in 3 strides, grabbing Harker by the collar and slamming him against a post. "Say her name again," he growled, voice low and shaking. Harker didn't flinch. "You think this changes anything? Men like me don't lose. We regroup." Behind them, Raven screamed, a sound so raw it made the air vibrate. The horse lunged against the rope, hooves striking sparks on the concrete. The deputies turned, shouting, but Jack knew it wasn't rage. It was warning. A door burst open at the far end of the barn, and 2 of Harker's men stormed in with rifles raised. Gunfire erupted, deafening inside the metal walls. Jack ducked, dragging Nora down behind a feed bin. One of the deputies returned fire, splintering wood above the attackers' heads. Harker shoved free and bolted for the side door. Jack chased him out into the snow, slipping on the ice. The storm that had vanished earlier was returning, the wind rising again, swirling flakes into a blind white haze. "Harker!" he shouted. The man turned near the corral fence, pistol drawn. "You should have stayed broken, Murdoch," he spat, and fired. The bullet grazed Jack's arm, spinning him sideways. He hit the ground hard, snow exploding around him. The world narrowed to pain and the sound of hooves. Raven had burst from the barn, rope trailing, eyes blazing. He charged, cutting the distance in seconds. Harker turned too slow. The horse struck him with a shoulder, sending him sprawling into the drift. The gun flew from his hand and vanished into the snow. Harker groaned, half buried, reaching for the fence post to stand. Jack got up, clutching his bleeding arm, and limped toward him. The horse stood guard between them, breath steaming, tail lashing. "It's over," Jack said. Harker laughed, low and hoarse. "You think you've saved anything? They'll build again. There'll always be buyers." "Then maybe this is where it stops for me." Nora appeared behind him, weapon raised. "Hands where I can see them, Harker." The man sneered, but obeyed, his arrogance cracking at last. Deputies swarmed the yard, shouting commands. Within minutes, the scene dissolved into handcuffs, evidence bags, and the weary sound of victory that tastes more like exhaustion than triumph. Jack leaned against the fence, blood seeping through his sleeve. Nora came over, pressing a cloth to the wound. "You're lucky," she said. "Half an inch closer, and you'd be drinking soup for the rest of your life." "Guess luck finally found me?" Lily ran across the snow and threw her arms around him. "You're bleeding!" "I've been worse," he smiled faintly. "Go check on Raven." The horse stood nearby, chest heaving, his dark coat slick with melting snow. Lily approached, hands trembling, and touched his muzzle. Raven lowered his head until their foreheads met, both breathing in time. Nora watched them, shaking her head. "I've seen a lot of things, but that's something else." "Faith," Jack said quietly. "That's all it ever was." By dawn, the ranch was surrounded by patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting the snow in shifting color. Harker sat in the back of a cruiser, face blank, eyes hollow. Jack watched as they drove him away, the tires crunching over ice. Nora turned to him. "You did good, Jack." He looked toward the horizon, where the first light was breaking through the storm, gold against the silver sky. "We all did," Raven snorted softly beside him, pressing close, as if agreeing. The wind that blew through the valley carried no threat this time, only the sound of freedom. The sun rose slowly over Timber Falls, the light spilling across the frozen valley like gold poured over glass. The storm had spent its last breath during the night, and now the snow lay smooth and undisturbed. No more chaos. No more running. Jack stood on his porch, a mug of coffee warming his bandaged hand, watching the day begin. For the first time in years, the world felt still enough to listen down in the pasture. Raven moved with the quiet confidence of something that had survived the fire and chosen to live. His coat, dark as wet soil, glowed with streaks of copper where the light caught it. He stepped through the snow with deliberate grace, nostrils flaring, each exhale curling into the morning air. Jack found himself smiling without realizing it. Lily came out onto the porch, her breath white against the cold. She leaned against the rail beside him. "He doesn't look wild anymore," she said. Jack sipped his coffee. "No," he answered. "He just looks free." The quiet stretched between them, comfortable and deep. They'd spent the last 2 days giving statements, answering questions, sitting through the slow grind of paperwork. Harker was locked away, and the ranch had been seized by state authorities. The news had already hit the local papers. Illegal horse operation dismantled in Wyoming. The kind of headline Jack used to glance past on the diner counter without thinking. He didn't care about the story. He cared about what was left standing. Nora had stopped by that morning, leaving a folder of photos for evidence. "They'll call it justice," she'd said, "but I call it overdue." She'd paused on the porch, her expression softening, as she looked at Raven grazing near the fence. "You going to keep him?" Jack had hesitated, hand resting on the doorframe. "No," he'd said finally. "I'm going to let him choose." Now, as the morning light thickened, he saw Raven lift his head and turn toward the open gate at the far end of the field. The latch hung loose. Lily must have forgotten to close it last night. The horse stared at it for a long while, tail flicking, the distance between captivity and wilderness just a few steps away. Lily noticed, too. "Should we go close it?" Jack shook his head. "Let's see what he does." They stood together, watching as Raven took one slow step, then another. He reached the gate, the wind lifting his mane like smoke. For a heartbeat, Jack thought he might bolt, just vanish into the tree line and never look back. But the horse stopped. He turned, eyes finding Jack and Lily on the porch. Then, with a deep, rumbling snort, he lowered his head and began to graze near the fence post. Lily laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. Guess he made his choice. Jack swallowed against the ache in his throat. Guess so. Later, when the chores were done, they walked down to the pasture together. The snow squeaked under their boots. Raven met them halfway, breath rising in steady clouds. Jack reached out, resting a hand against the horse's neck. The scar there, the cruel, burned C, had faded to a faint shadow beneath the hair. He ran his thumb over it. Doesn't define you anymore, does it? Raven exhaled, warm against his arm, and leaned closer, enough to make Jack lose balance and laugh, something rough and real that echoed through the valleys. They stood there until the cold began to bite again. Lily tugged at his sleeve. We should head inside. Sheriff Wade said she'd bring by the release papers. Right, Jack said, still looking at Raven. Let's not keep the law waiting. Inside the house, the fire crackled in the stove, filling the air with the smell of pine and ash. Jack sank into his chair, the old one by the window, and looked around at what remained. Photos on the mantel, the half-fixed tools, the quiet hum of a home that was finally his again. He'd rebuilt the barn yesterday, with Nora's deputies helping hammer new beams into place. It wasn't perfect, but it stood straight. That was enough. Lily brought him a folder. The sheriff said you need to sign these. Jack flipped through the pages, seeing his name printed again and again. Statements, ownership transfers, insurance forms for the barn. He laughed softly. Seems there's more paperwork to peace than there ever was to war. Lily sat across from him. Do you think it's really over? He looked out the window, watching Raven paw at the snow, sunlight catching on the horse's mane. Over? Maybe not. Things like this never end all the way. But for now, it's quiet. That's close enough. A knock came at the door. Nora stepped in, brushing snow off her hat. You two look almost domestic, she said, smiling. Paperwork's official. Ranch is clear. Harker's arraignment set for Monday. State wants to keep Raven under observation for a few weeks, but I told them that horse isn't going anywhere he doesn't choose to. Jack nodded. Thank you, Nora. For all of it. Just doing my job. She tipped her hat toward Lily. You take care of that father of yours. He's got a habit of finding trouble. Lily grinned. I've noticed. After she left, Jack walked back out to the porch. The wind had softened into a breeze, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. He stood there a long time, watching the sky change colors, pink, then amber, then the pale blue of something new beginning. Raven lifted his head again, eyes following the same horizon. Jack whispered, almost to himself, You did good, boy. You reminded me what a man's supposed to fight for. The horse flicked his ears, as if he understood. When Lily came out a few minutes later, she found her father standing beside Raven in the field, both of them still and quiet, the sun setting behind them in long ribbons of light. It was a picture she knew she'd keep forever, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it wasn't. Because it was peace. As the first stars appeared, Jack turned toward the house. Come on, he said to Raven, voice low and certain. Let's go home. And for once, the word home didn't sound like a wound. It sounded like a promise kept. If this story touched your heart, tell me what you felt in the comments below. Even a single word, at like if you believe. Kindness still matters. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story, where hope finds its way back home again.